Welcome, data enthusiasts. My name is Joseph, co-founder of Zuma Recruitment, the consultancy focused 100% on data tech professionals in and around Berlin. And this is our podcast, Data for Good, connecting you with all things data. And today I am very pleased to be joined finally by Henrieke Max. Henrieke is Interim Head of Advanced Analytics and Data Science at Delivery Hero in Berlin, of course. Henrieke, how are you today?
Pretty good. Spring is coming and good to be here today.
I can see. I like your background with the sun shining through and very leafy and green.
Yeah, I planted some trees for the podcast.
Oh, brilliant. Excellent. Okay. Around 30 minutes, a lot to get through. I think this is a big, meaty topic. And today, I understand we are to talk about navigating the risks or uncertainties of delivering data science projects in corporate or in a corporate environment. Could you introduce this for us? What will we be discussing today? What's important to you?
For sure. So perhaps what's helpful is just a little bit of context on my team and my role and why this topic's been accompanying me for a while now. So I'm currently leading a mixed data team with some engineers, data scientists, and analysts. And our main mission is to serve a team called the International Markets team at Delivery Hero that is essentially like an in-house consulting team that is ultimately accountable for our global performance management and our path to profitability and sustainable growth. And it's a very, very fast-paced environment, and it's an environment where our data team, it doesn't necessarily, is assigned to one single function like marketing or sales, but we mold with how the business moves and adjust to the needs, and that's often very, very fast-paced. Nevertheless, we are a data science team, and things in data science don't always move that fast, and there's an incredible amount of uncertainty to deal with. So we are constantly faced with this trade-off and pressure to deliver value and do magic with the data, but at the same time ensure that we're putting our skills to use in the right way, and we are also doing our due diligence of highlighting long-term investments in data science use cases that might bear some risks and costs, but that can really have a bigger impact than maybe the quicker turnarounds. So that's a little bit, I think, what we want to look at more closely today, how to navigate that trade-off.
Super. That would be great to go into. I think that would be helpful for the likes of team leaders and even business leaders across organizations that are adopting data science projects or data science delivered through data science projects. I think it'd be good to also include the individual contributors, the scientists, the engineers, and the analysts, and how these risks affect them as well. And it might be something for these folks who are listening and watching, for them to be able to signpost when they're introduced to new projects. Things for them to navigate and to be aware of. Okay, so really high level, to further put this into context, what might some of those risks be in starting data science projects?
For sure. So I think there's a couple, maybe three main ones I can think of that we have encountered coming from our experience as a team. So maybe the biggest one is just a resource risk. I would summarize it. Data science experts are costly to maintain in a company, and they also need to, alongside delivering, make a continuous investment in keeping their skills up to date and staying on top of latest developments, updates, new tooling, etc. And perhaps linked to that, I think there's this risk of the opportunity costs. So, we might have project B that has very high potential returns, but if it fails, it might have been wiser to invest in project A that maybe has lower but safer returns. And then a third area I have observed is this risk of losing trust. So I think there are tons of situations where a data science project that has seen a lot of investment and time, maybe money, fails because there are data quality limitations or operational limitations or changes in the environment, essentially factors that are beyond control. But if there isn't enough communication and awareness building around it, especially with the business stakeholders that at the end of the day depend on your products or we're counting on you, it could be perceived as a competence issue on part of the team. And so I think building that trust and maintaining it through communication and education is really important.
Excellent. Okay. So the trust risks, the resourcing risks, and the opportunity cost risks. Okay. Let's look at the project from the first stage. Any given project, if we are to consider resourcing, opportunity cost, and building and ensuring trust. Firstly, where would you take your project scopes from or business casing from? With a view to thinking about identifying those risks really early on.
Yeah, there's numerous factors that usually sort of add up in our calculation of which project do we take on. As I mentioned, we're very much a team that has to some extent go with the flow of the business and the big topics that come up. And so there's just an endless amount of use cases that we could be working on, which I think is a bit different maybe from having a clear function assigned. But so generally I think there's the sort of the timeline dimension of it. How quickly do we need to reach a conclusion on this topic? Is something on fire? Then it's very much more likely that it ends up with the BI analytics team. Maybe the work you can do is not as conclusive or deep or statistically clean, let's say, but sometimes that's just what we face in day-to-day business. Then I think the topics that we do tend to go for or select in this process of scoping are the ones that have potential to be scaled. We in our case operate in lots of different markets, so to some extent the potential for generalizability and impact and relevance across these markets is really important. Another one is the data maturity. So basically, what is the data resource that we can work with? In the past, sometimes we've jumped at very fresh services or businesses we've launched and said, hey, can we do some modeling around this? But the truth was, even the the data cleanliness wasn't where it needed to be. It wasn't a priority operationally yet. So we weren't able to go for that. So some data maturity, scalability, and then a third factor is, especially in large or distributed organizations where you work with teams across different markets, I think an openness for collaboration and a shared consensus that this topic matters among business stakeholders, potentially local teams, is really, really important. So yeah, we've had use cases where we're really excited, but we realize that we're not aligned on, is this a priority? And then you don't have the conversation that you need in the process of building a POC that is required for the project to have a chance to succeed.
So taking into account all these factors, is there do you communicate at the very beginning like a risk validation with the business unit manager you're working with? You know, they give you the business case, they talk about the problem statement, what they need to achieve, and then you identify the risks and communicate that back with them. Does it look something like this, or could you show me what it might look like, that kind of early stage risk mitigation, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say we didn't used to do this so thoroughly, but we've sort of grown in the extent to which we try to do our due diligence in these early stages, because it can save a lot of time later on. So I would say if you know there's a challenge brought to us from the business side, the first is really collecting all kinds of information. So mapping out who are the relevant stakeholders who hold business expertise and understanding on this, who are the people who are currently familiar or own the data sources that we would be using, and is there any pre-existing work or documentation that has been done on this topic, even if it's not, you know, in the realm of data science, maybe it's just in the, let's say, analytics stage, and basically doing almost like a mapping across the organization of who holds some pre-existing knowledge on this topic. That's really important, because I think actually even in mid-sized organizations, this risk of duplicating work or missing a really important factor early on that costs you a lot of time is very, very high. And it can also really help in narrow down what really is the problem. Sometimes the business stakeholder approaches us and thinks they need one thing, and we work together and we realize, oh, actually, you know, we need to shift our focus on something else, and it's a much more narrow and well-defined scope than it was initially, where it was more of a fuzzy high-level challenge. So I would say, yes, collecting information, asking a ton of questions, and then perhaps proactively really probing what could be the risks here. And that becomes easier because there are actually often recurring risks regardless of the project. I can give one example here, maybe, where we started working on a model where we hoped to better understand or better identify customers and the likelihood of customers using not only our services, but also similar services. And knowing this, we could have, you know, approached them better through the app, how we target them, and yeah, basically try to increase their loyalty towards us. And we generated quite a lot of excitement with relevant teams. We did do part of our due diligence, collecting that information, familiarizing ourselves with the data, but we didn't actually properly communicate with the key team owning the data that was going to be the foundation of our model.
Oh,
and in the process, we somewhat randomly learned that this data was going to be deprecated and molded into, you know, a new shape, and we were lucky that we found out, you know, and were able to develop a workaround. But it's a very constantly, you know, our data structures are changing and being optimized and adapted, and if you don't own the data you're using, then that should be a no-brainer to, you know, be very vocal about the fact that we are now investing something in this data, and you know, let's keep communication lines open if something changes. So these types of risks, I think, once you know they can happen, you can easily mitigate them. Yeah, and I think perhaps a final one is to try to define outcomes and success criteria, which can be quite difficult when starting to engage in a new data science project. But basically, how high do we set the bar for, you know, a model 0? How good does it have to perform for us to go deeper and invest even more time?
And who do you do that with? Do you do that with the business unit manager, or your team members who would ultimately deliver the project, or all of those people? Who's
Ideally
involved with that?
together. So I think we would basically be the team that translates what we get from the business side of, what is good enough or what would be an improvement versus how we're operating now. We can give a little bit of input of, in a way, almost how much are you investing in this? This was going to be one full-time data scientist working on this. Do you think, let's say, assuming this improvement, this much improvement, do you consider that worth it? And once we have that, we can actually, try to translate that into more of the actual hard performance criteria for our model, into, accuracy, whatever KPI you're going to use. So I would say we need the input from the business, but we were able to translate it into the hard measurables.
Mm-hmm. Okay. As I look back on opportunity costs, what if those data scientists and analysts and engineers were working on another project where they could gain value that we can quantify, or this project, opportunity costs, or building trust ongoing. Is there an approach you might take to getting at least quick wins or early wins for the business to see the value and therefore lessen their perception of risk?
Yes, I think when it comes to risk mitigation, if we stay on like a one project level,
Okay.
involving business stakeholders more, even in the EDA phase. So if you do exploratory analysis, as a data scientist, one might think, okay, this is just, the basis of me then going into feature engineering and modeling. And you might not realize that you're actually already creating insights that are not yet known to the organization. So in a way, we started creating, even visuals and outputs that the business can use at that stage already, and that can be even a feedback loop. Maybe we're seeing some surprising patterns. So we're not ambitioning to deliver a polished product to the business stakeholder. We're sort of looping them into the process, and that also builds a little bit of empathy for the data science life cycle among people who may not, be as connected in their day-to-day to more technical work. So that is one.
So that is to include them in the process. So keeping them informed, keeping them educated, revealing perhaps unknown additional outcomes that also serve as value, but generally keeping them involved to kind of win their empathy and understanding as to what you're delivering. Okay, so that's one. Awesome.
Exactly. I would say one is less at the project level and more relating back to this element or risk factor of losing trust. Not every project is going to be a quick win or a win. Some will fail. And so I think thinking about your team, if there's, more than one project that you own, ensuring that the portfolio is right. So whether you plan in sprints or quarterly, OKRs, basically planning a share of your time on either existing products, enhancing them that just work and that already have an audience that depends on them, that have proven themselves, or, going with some projects there you feel quite confident that they can work, to basically, have that portfolio of things that people can rely on, that you show where you're adding value, and that's buying you maybe, 30-40% of your time, where you can be more exploratory and have a higher risk appetite, because you have a project portfolio to fall back on.
That sounds to me like hedging your bets, we might say, in gambling terms, or spreading the risk. So putting some focus on easier projects where you can get quicker wins, and maybe would you show those wins to business unit managers, and then you garner some support, and that gives you the opportunity to take on these other riskier projects? Is that loosely how it works, or am I wide of the mark?
It's a very, very good summary.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Okay, good to know. And how about, so that's more short term. How about the longer term strategies that you might adopt?
Yeah, that's
particularly with trust.
Very, very good question. I think that communicating wins, sometimes we tend to brush over them and move on to the next project or the next development cycle. And sometimes what was actually a very good achievement and very challenging from a data science perspective may not be as obvious from the end user perspective, to again ensuring that you take that moment to really show your wins, even if it might seem like, oh, this is extra time, really articulating this to the right teams and stakeholders. I would say that's a really important one. And then longer term, I also think it's very important to just know where to stop digging as well. From an emotional perspective, if you've invested an incredible amount of time and you have people in your team who are passionate for a project and they want it to work out, it can be very hard to find that decision moment where you also just show, well, we also know where to stop. We've identified the reasons that this isn't working, and we have to let it go. And I think that's part of a longer term strategy, to also demonstrate that as a data science team, you're able to have that maturity to recognize it and move on if necessary.
Okay, super. We focused on the opportunity cost and particularly the trust area, and building credibility through smaller wins and bigger wins, or shorter term wins and longer term wins. Thinking about resourcing, not only the risks, but I want you to consider your team members, because there's pressure on them. There's pressure in their career if they're having to take on the risks that product and project managers give them. What are your considerations, or what do you think should be the considerations of team members when they take on these potentially riskier projects?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think quite important to not overlook it, also from a retention and team energy level, and really making the best of your talent. So I would say, first of all, I think people operate very differently, right? Some people really, really care about doing work where their impact will be very visible, and it's sort of a safer bet. But then there are also people who are, or maybe also at a stage of their career, they really want to focus on skill building. So they might take on a high risk project because it exposes them to new challenges. And even if it fails, let's say their personal goal has been reached. But I also think that cultivating a culture where failing is part of your work and normalizing that is really important, and finding almost a structured way of working with that. So one example is we had a project where we explored a data point, our user ratings, and we thought it was a very powerful one, and we were going to be able to build a model where it helps us really understand the customer journey and where we need to focus on. And anyway, it turned out that it was not such an impactful, informative data point, and we had to eventually you could say give up. And what we started doing was we don't just let it go. We actually, we create documentation, we create a reflection within the team, and we document why did this fail? What did we learn in the process? How are we maybe saving on, future work with this? And almost having a repository around the learnings, whether or not we succeed or fail, because that adds value irrespectively. And I think, again, also at a personal level, making sure that each person in the team has a good mix ability to venture into new things, but also work within their comfort zone and work within parameters where we can be pretty sure that we'll succeed on, some projects that they're touching.
Okay. I take from that some key points. Appreciate that failure is a part of your work. Find a structure to cope with that and to manage that, and ensure that you're documenting throughout to create a knowledge base, but also to be able to reflect on this, understand where the learnings have been, and use that understanding to approach better or differently or even the same for future projects, and work within those parameters. I'm thinking, is it critical, or is there some criticality for your team members, the data scientists, the engineers, and the analysts? Should they be communicating with you, the leader, about the risks? Do they need to speak up more? Is the onus on them for these kind of topics?
I would say it's both ways, but absolutely, particularly more experienced data scientists. Bring that ability to anticipate risks. I think, as I briefly mentioned earlier, a lot of risks they're not unique to one project. They sort of fall into patterns that we see across they're entering into different new models, and I would say they're one of the best sources to listen to when it comes to the risk exercise. But I also think it could also be the reverse, where we get very excited about a use case, perhaps because the data's there, which is always a massive pain point, the state and quality and accessibility of the data. But actually the local expertise in our company, the business expertise, is telling us, but we don't see the impact potential, or, we see some risk because this product's actually still very much moving parts. It's going to change a lot. So the maintenance and the effort of keeping up with those moving parts would be way too high. So I would say it's maybe not, it's not the sole responsibility of the data scientists, but it's definitely definitely needs to be consulted, but just as much as the people who have the data operational insights and business savviness.
I'm just thinking of a point that you made earlier about the appetite for risk of team members. Sometimes they might not mind taking on a risky project that doesn't cost them anything, but could cost the business a lot of money. And they wouldn't mind doing that because they get to learn something, they get to take on skills, they get to work in certain frameworks and tools. How do you balance, as a leader, how do you balance those topics? Because without accusing anybody, I'm just thinking of the average human. I might want to take on that project and not really consider that it's huge risk from a business perspective. How do you balance those kind of personal needs with the business needs?
Very, very good question.
Very good or very difficult?
It's a very difficult question. I can't say I have a perfect answer there, but it's more a human than a technical answer I can give there. It's really, I think, about I think any good data scientist also has to understand, ultimately the justification for having a data science team and the need to sometimes go down the safe route. So again, I think it's about having that conversation and Something I've done in the past is to say, this quarter we have these projects, we know that we can deliver on them. They're not the most exciting ones for you. They might be repeating, and drawing the expertise you've built in the past. But we also have this project lined up. So, going into that negotiation and always making sure there's enough exciting things in the pipeline, but also being very direct and honest about, some things just have to get done, and we'll keep the balance right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for addressing or trying to answer that difficult question. Finally, as you are interim leader of analytics and data science, and as you progress up your own career path, I wonder, what advice could you give to leaders or team leaders who are taking on this new data science leadership role and these responsibilities as a project leader?
I think it's an indirect summary of some of the themes we've touched upon, but I would try to succinctly pull it together. So I think, for one, really champion the idea that failure isn't personal, it's a part of the process, maybe by even sharing your own stories of failing, also by giving recognition for people who have the courage to try and fail, introducing the kind of failing smart practices, like documenting the learnings, involving business stakeholders closely, so they understand the reasons for a potential failure, or they can also just increase the chances of success. Then ensuring a safe distribution of, safe bets, daily business, and exciting but riskier data science ventures. And I think the final one would be really, the communication of smaller and bigger wins, and building empathy among stakeholders you work with for the data science project lifecycle. I do think, a lot of tech companies claim to be, or are, data driven. And I think it's very reasonable to expect, even of neighboring teams and stakeholders you interact with, even if their core focus isn't on data, that they build an increasing awareness and maybe sense for, the risk and opportunities. So helping your team by having those conversations with your, say, key stakeholders can also really help. Maybe a final one, which can also help with quick wins, really ensuring that you build an infrastructure that allows you to iterate quickly. So simple things like ensuring you have a clean, development and production setup, that you can create new pipelines, new data pipelines quickly. Very fortunate to have a fantastic engineer on my team who, builds abstractions that, they are generalizable across projects. So we save a lot of time, and we arrive at certain conclusions much more quickly, and then allows people in your team to take risks, with a lighter heart.
Shout out to Henrique's superstar engineer there.
Yes, actually.
That final one around quick wins, making sure that you have an infrastructure to iterate quickly. That sounds like not just a method to get quick wins, but to ensure that there's stability and foundation to keep producing projects with great outcomes. So yeah, I would take that very seriously, rather than just the short term and the quick wins. Okay. Would you also recommend that data scientists, analysts and engineers, they should be communicating those wins more and as much as possible? Would it be helpful as for you as a leader who can't see everything? Would it be extra helpful if they are to, hey guys, I really need you to tell me when you've done something great, or we've found another piece of information that would be valuable to the team, would you really encourage them to communicate every little win for you and the team?
To me, I would say, sure. I mean, it also depends on, the intensity, the scope of your team, and how close you can keep the communication lines there. But what I would say is, I think about this trade-off. So I think good communication with other teams, it takes time, especially if they're non-technical teams. You need to translate what you've done into something that has meaning to them. So I do think it's very, very important that any data role, there's an ability, and you build that ability to do that. At the same time, I recognize it takes time. So sharing almost like a live stream of small wins could just create noise. But I would say sharing it within the team that you collaborate with day to day, and then maybe even helping each other identify, well, yeah, we think this is a milestone, this is a good moment in the process to spread the news about this is definitely helpful. And where I can, I definitely cut myself out as the middle person. I think it's very, very useful if the people who do the work, they're able to share their wins directly and identify when that's useful step in the process.
Yeah, to show some humility as a leader by letting the individual contributors come forward. Okay. Henrieke, that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much for sharing lots of useful information about navigating the risks of delivering data science projects. I think that'd be super helpful for team leaders, more senior data leaders, but also team members. So big help. Thanks so much for that today.
Thank you, Joseph. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. All right. And for any viewers or listeners, we'll see you all next time.